On a quiet winter morning in Hollow Creek, a former Navy SEAL heard something softer than a bark. From the snow came a tiny German Shepherd puppy, shaking, starving, and carrying an old milk bottle in his mouth. Grant Rourke had sworn he would never let another dog into his heart after losing his K9 partner. But the puppy did not come looking for food. He came carrying the scent of a mother, a forgotten farm, and a message no one else had heard. What Grant found beyond the pine trees would change not only one dog's life, but his own wounded heart. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Hollow Creek, Vermont, woke beneath a clean winter light, the kind that made every old thing look forgiven for a few hours. Snow lay thin across the roofs of empty barns and tired sheds. It rested along fence rails in bright white lines, filled the hoofprints in frozen pastures, and softened the narrow forest road that ran between abandoned farms, like a secret the town had forgotten how to tell. Smoke rose from a few chimneys in pale blue threads. Somewhere beyond the pines, a truck engine coughed once, then faded into the morning. At the edge of the Bellamy Woods, Grant Rourke stood behind his cabin with a hammer in one gloved hand and a bent nail pinched between his teeth. He was 49 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, built less like a man who lifted weights and more like a man who still split his own firewood because paying someone else felt like admitting defeat. His olive-drab combat shirt fit close across his chest beneath an old canvas coat, the camouflage sleeves worn at the elbows, the dark horizontal bands across his upper arms, faded by years of weather and work. His boots were planted wide in the snow. His breath came out steady. The fence did not need repairing that morning. Not urgently. A moose had not come through it. No fallen tree had cracked the rails. No neighbor had called to complain about wandering livestock, mostly because Grant had no livestock, and most neighbors had learned that calling Grant required a stronger reason than gossip. But work had its uses. A board could be measured, a nail could be driven straight. A split rail could be replaced by another rail, and if the hammer landed cleanly enough, for one small second the world obeyed. Grant liked things that obeyed. He struck the nail again. The sound jumped through the pines and came back smaller, as though the forest had swallowed half of it. Hollow Creek remained still. White fields, blue shadows, the old Bellamy land beyond the trees. His cabin behind him, square and quiet, with smoke rising from the black pipe over the roof. A man could make a life out of quiet if he was stubborn enough. Grant had done it. He kept the wood stacked before the first hard freeze. He kept canned soup in the pantry, coffee in the tin, spare batteries in the drawer beside the stove. He drove into town twice a week and spoke when spoken to. He paid cash. He shoveled his own drive. He did not linger at church suppers, did not join the veterans' breakfast at Doyle's Diner, did not let anyone make a habit of checking on him. People in Hollow Creek had decided he was private. That was the polite word. Grant preferred it. Private sounded like a choice. It sounded better than haunted, and it required fewer explanations. He bent to pick up another nail from the snow. His left wrist pulled at the motion, and the small leather cord beneath his glove shifted against his skin. He felt the little metal ring tied there. He always did, even when he pretended not to. It had once belonged to a collar, not a medal, not a tag. Nothing anyone would recognize as military. Just a small blackened ring from the working collar of a dog named Rourke, a German shepherd who had known Grant's breathing better than Grant did. Rourke had been trained to find explosives, track scent through dust and heat, hold still under gunfire, and wait for a command even when every instinct in his body screamed otherwise. In the end, Rourke had disobeyed once. Or maybe he had understood the situation better than the man giving orders. Grant had made the wrong call. A doorway, a delay. A second that should have belonged to caution, but had gone instead to confidence. Rourke had moved before Grant could stop him. The dog had taken the blast and left Grant alive in a world that suddenly felt like a debt with no payment large enough. People had said Rourke saved him. Grant knew that. He also knew being saved could feel like being sentenced. The hammer came down too hard. The nail bent sideways. Grant stared at it. "Wonderful," he muttered. "Professional work." The fence, wisely, made no reply. He pulled the bent nail free and tossed it into the coffee can at his feet. The small clink sounded sharp in the cold. Above him, snow slipped from a pine branch and fell in a soft puff beyond the fence line. That was when he heard it. Not a bark, not a yelp. A thin sound, barely there. A thread of breath pulled through pain. Grant froze with one hand on the rail. The woods held still. He waited. Old habits rose inside him without permission. Listen past the obvious, separate wind from movement, animal from branch, fear from threat. His eyes moved along the tree line where the Bellamy pines grew close together, their trunks black against the snow. There, a flicker of gold and black. At first, Grant thought it was a leaf caught low in the brush, one of autumn's last stubborn scraps. Then it moved again, wrong for a leaf, too slow for a rabbit, too small for a fox. Something was coming through the snow. Grant set the hammer down. A German shepherd puppy staggered out from between the pines. It was so small that the snow seemed too large for it. Its legs were short and unsteady, paws sinking at every step. Soft black and honey-colored fur clung damply to its ribs. Its belly was tucked tight from hunger. One ear tried bravely to lift and failed, folding sideways as though the world had pressed it down. The other ear lay soft against its head. Its eyes were dark amber, far too serious for a creature that had probably been alive less than 2 months. In its mouth it carried an old nursing bottle, not a baby bottle. Grant saw that at once when the puppy came closer. It was the kind used for orphaned animals, small and narrow, the plastic yellowed with age, the rubber nipple chewed crooked. Scratches marked its side. A faint crust of dried milk clung near the rim. The puppy took 3 more steps, stopped, swayed. Grant did not move toward it too quickly. Fear made young animals spend what little strength they had. He crouched slowly, letting one knee sink into the snow. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded strange in the open morning, too rough, as if it had been stored in a cold drawer. The puppy looked at him. Not at the house, not at the fence, not at the coffee can, the hammer, the work gloves, or the smoke coming from the chimney. At him. Then it came on. One step, another, a stumble, a pause. The bottle knocked against its chest with a hollow little tap. The puppy's breath fluttered through its nose. Its whole body shook, but its eyes stayed fixed on Grant's boots as if those boots were the last landmark on earth. Grant's throat tightened. He had seen brave things in his life. Most of them had not looked brave while happening. Bravery often looked like a trembling hand reaching anyway, or a man making a joke because terror needed somewhere to sit, or a dog moving forward when every living part of him wanted to stay. This looked like that. The puppy reached the toe of Grant's right boot, lowered its head, and placed the bottle in the snow. Then its legs folded. Grant caught it before its chin hit the ground. The body in his hands was colder than it should have been. Not dead cold, not yet, but the cold of a small life slipping toward a door it did not know how to close. He tucked the puppy against his chest, inside the open front of his coat. "Oh, you foolish little thing," he whispered. The puppy made one weak sound. Grant did not remember deciding to move. One moment he was kneeling in the snow beside the fence. The next he was striding toward the cabin with the puppy held against him and the old bottle clenched in his other hand. The cabin door opened into warmth and the smell of wood smoke, coffee, old leather, and pine resin. Grant kicked it shut behind him. The room was spare but not neglected. A cast-iron stove glowed near the far wall. A braided rug lay in front of it, faded at the center. Boots lined the entry. A rifle case sat locked in one corner. On the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee had gone cold beside a folded newspaper he had not read. Grant cleared the table with one sweep of his arm, then caught the mug before it fell. "Good. Still domestic," he muttered. He laid a towel down and set the puppy on it. The little dog tried to lift its head and failed. Grant stripped off his gloves, checked gums, breathing, paws, belly. Too cold, too empty. No obvious broken bones, no blood. The fur held a smell he recognized at once, and it struck him harder than he expected. Milk, wet straw, another dog, a mother. Grant stilled. The puppy was not alone in the world, or it had not been. He moved quickly then, but carefully. He warmed towels near the stove, not too hot. He found a small dropper in the bathroom cabinet left over from some old medicine. From the pantry, he took the emergency can of goat milk powder he kept for an injured barn cat that had visited 2 winters ago, and then, with the rude independence of cats, recovered and never thanked him. He mixed the milk thin and warm. The puppy stirred when the smell reached it. A tiny tongue touched the dropper. It swallowed once, then again. "Slow," Grant said. "You're not storming a beach." The puppy ignored this excellent advice and tried to gulp. Grant eased the dropper back. "That's right. Make me the villain. Everyone does, eventually." For the first time that morning, the corner of his mouth moved. The puppy's fur began to dry in soft, uneven tufts. Its color showed more clearly now, black saddle still forming over a honey-gold body, darker shading along the muzzle, a pale mark on the chest shaped almost like a drop of spilled milk. Grant rubbed it gently with the towel, feeling each rib under his fingers. "You need a name," he said, though he knew better. Names were hooks. Hooks became habits. Habits became grief. The puppy opened one amber eye and stared at him with exhausted disapproval. Grant sighed. "Fine. Temporary name." The puppy blinked. "Pip," Grant said. "Because you're small, inconvenient, and apparently determined to ruin my morning." Pip made a faint sound that might have been agreement or complaint. Either way, it was rude enough to suit him. Grant fed him a little more. Then he tucked him inside a warm towel near the stove and sat back on his heels. For several minutes, nothing happened. Snowlight lay across the floorboards. The stove ticked. The wind moved softly along the north wall. Pip's breathing steadied by small degrees, each breath a fragile vote in favor of staying alive. Grant told himself that was enough. He had found the puppy. He had warmed it. He would call someone. Dr. Lena Whitcomb, probably. She knew animals and had the frightening habit of being right. Or county animal control, if they could get anyone out before the next snow ban rolled in. There were systems for this, forms, procedures, other people. Grant stood and reached for his phone. Behind him, something scraped. He turned. Pip had pushed himself out of the towel. The puppy was barely able to stand. His legs shook under him, and his head wobbled with the effort. But he was moving inch by inch toward the table leg where Grant had set the old nursing bottle. "No," Grant said. "Absolutely not." Pip ignored him. The puppy reached the bottle, opened his tiny mouth, and tried to grip the rubber nipple. It took him 3 attempts. On the 4th, he caught it. Then, with a determination that would have been funny if it had not been so painful to watch, he dragged the bottle across the floor. Not toward the stove, not toward the food, toward the back door. Grant stared. "Pip?" The puppy tugged again. The bottle bumped over a seam in the floorboards. Pip lost his footing and fell on his side, still holding on. Grant crossed the room and lifted him gently. "You're done. You hear me? You made your point?" But Pip twisted weakly in his hands, not enough to escape, enough to aim his head toward the door. The small body trembled. The old bottle hung from his mouth like a message delivered by a messenger too young to read it. Grant looked toward the back window. Beyond the glass, the pines stood dark and close. Past them lay the Bellamy land. Old barns, empty fields, a farmhouse no one had seen, lit in weeks. A place people in town spoke of with soft regret and no urgency, the way small towns sometimes buried concern beneath weather and chores and the comfort of assuming someone else had checked. Grant thought of the smell in Pip's fur. Milk, straw, mother. He thought of Rourke moving before the order came because sometimes love recognized danger faster than training did. His hand tightened around the puppy. "No," he said again, but this time the word had changed. It was no longer a command. It was a plea addressed to the morning, to memory, to whatever cruel little angel had sent a half-frozen shepherd puppy to his fence with a bottle in its mouth. Pip gave one thin whine. Grant closed his eyes. There were many ways to lose a life. He had learned that early. Bullets and blasts were only the loud ones. There were quieter losses, too. Doors left closed, calls not made, tracks in snow allowed to fill before anyone followed them. When he opened his eyes, Pip was still looking at the door. Grant knew before he wanted to know. This puppy had not come to be saved. This puppy had come to bring him back. Grant set Pip inside his coat, close to the warmth of his chest. He picked up the old nursing bottle and turned it once in his hand. Scratched plastic. Chewed nipple. A faint mark on the side he could not quite read beneath the frost and dried milk. Then he reached for his canvas coat, the flashlight, and the fence cutters hanging by the mudroom door. Outside, the snow kept falling softly over Hollow Creek, covering old sins and new tracks alike. Grant opened the back door and stood at the threshold, feeling the cold step into the cabin like an unwelcome witness. Pip stirred against his chest. Grant looked toward the pines. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me what you came for." And with the tiny heartbeat of a German shepherd puppy tapping against him, Grant Rourke stepped out into the white. Grant tried the animal control number twice before he left. The first call rang long enough for the silence in his cabin to feel embarrassed. The second gave him a recorded message about winter emergency delays, limited staff, and calls being answered in the order received. A woman's tired voice promised that every animal mattered. Then the line clicked and left him with the stove ticking, the wind worrying at the window seams, and a half-frozen German shepherd puppy trying to drag an old nursing bottle toward his back door. Grant stared at the phone in his hand. A reasonable man would wait. A reasonable man would keep the puppy warm, feed him slowly, and let the county do what counties did when snow was coming and everyone was short-handed. A reasonable man would not follow a creature the size of a rolled sock into the woods because it happened to have a stubborn set to its tiny jaw. Grant had been called many things in his life. Reasonable had never been the one that stuck. Pip lay inside the front of Grant's coat, tucked against his chest where the warmth was strongest. The puppy's body trembled in little waves. Not panic now. Exhaustion. The old nursing bottle rested in Grant's left hand, its scratched plastic cold against his fingers. He opened the mudroom cabinet and took down a flashlight, a coil of rope, and fence cutters with red handles worn smooth from years of use. He added a wool blanket, then paused and reached for a second one. The pause bothered him. It meant some part of him had already accepted what the rest of him was still trying not to name. He stepped outside. The cold found his face immediately, sharp and clean. Snow had begun falling again, not heavily yet, but with the steady patience of Vermont weather settling in for business. The back of his property sloped toward the Bellamy Woods, a stand of pine and birch that had once marked the edge between two working farms. Now it divided Grant's life from a place people mentioned only in past tense. Pip stirred inside his coat. "All right," Grant murmured. You're the guide. Terrible credentials. But here we are. The puppy gave a faint huff against his shirt. Grant crossed the yard and ducked under a low branch at the tree line. Snow brushed his shoulders. The woods received him with that particular winter hush that made even familiar land feel borrowed from another world. His boots broke through crusted snow. His flashlight beam moved over trunks, fallen needles, rabbit tracks, the small punched marks of birds. Then he saw them. Tiny tracks already softening at the edges. Not a trail anyone else would have noticed. A few shallow dents, a drag mark where the bottle must have bumped or where Pip's legs had given out, then nothing for a yard, then more. The puppy had not come far by any adult measure, a few 100 yards at most. But to a body that small, through snow that deep, it had been a crossing worthy of old songs. Grant followed slowly. The path bent between two pines, then dropped toward a sagging wire fence that had once kept dairy cows from wandering into the trees. Beyond it lay Bellamy land. Grant had not crossed onto it in months, not because anyone had forbidden him. Arthur Bellamy had always waved him through with a "Don't trip on my kingdom, Rourke," and Miriam, before she died, had sent him home more than once with jars of apple butter he had not asked for and did not deserve. But after Miriam passed, the place had changed. Not all at once. Old farms rarely fell apart dramatically. They surrendered in small negotiations, a loose hinge, a broken gutter, a pasture gate left open because no cattle remained to escape, paint peeling from the southern wall, one less light in the kitchen window. Arthur had tried to keep it going. Grant had seen him from the road some mornings, a narrow old man in a green wool cap, moving between barn and house with a bucket in one hand and Sable at his side. The dog had been unmistakable even at a distance. German shepherd, female, black saddle, over wheat gold fur, head high, pace measured to Arthur's step. Not a pet trailing behind, a partner keeping count of the world for him. Then Arthur vanished from his own routines. The town explanation came easily, too easily perhaps. Second Hearth Rescue had helped arrange winter care. Arthur had gone somewhere safe before the heavy snow. People repeated it with the relief of not having to do anything. Grant had repeated nothing. He had simply noticed the kitchen lights stopped coming on. The old fence sagged under his hand as he stepped over. Pip shifted, weak nose turning toward the open land. Grant came out of the trees and saw the Bellamy farm beneath the falling snow. The farmhouse stood at the far side of the yard, white paint gone gray in places, porch posts leaning like tired sentries. The main barn crouched behind it, roof bowed but still holding. Beyond that, near the old apple trees, sat a smaller shed with plank walls and a sloped tin roof patched in 3 different colors. The shed had not been used in years, as far as Grant knew. Smoke did not rise from the farmhouse chimney. No boot tracks marked the porch. No dog barked. The whole place had the look of a room where someone had stopped mid-sentence and never returned. Grant moved across the yard, keeping to the edge of the barn where the wind broke less sharply. Pip made a sound then, so thin Grant felt it more than heard it. The puppy pushed his head up from the coat, nose aiming toward the smaller shed. "That one?" Grant asked. Pip's body strained forward. Grant's mouth flattened. "Of course it's the creepy one." The joke came out dry, automatic. It warmed nothing, but it kept his hands steady. As he neared the shed, he saw the first sign that made the morning change shape. The door had been wired shut from the outside, not with an old loop of baling wire left by careless work. New wire, bright where the snow had not dulled it yet, wrapped twice through the latch and twisted hard with pliers. Grant crouched, his breath slowed. The old habits returned again, but this time they did not belong to memory. They belonged to the present. Fresh wire. No tracks visible now because snow had covered them, but the twist marks were sharp. Someone had meant the door to stay closed. From inside came a sound. A scrape, then another. Weak, slow. Claws against wood. Pip answered with a broken little whine. Grant set him gently inside the wool blanket near the wall, shielding him from wind with his own body. "Stay," he said, then almost laughed at himself. "Right. Excellent command work with the infant." Pip tried to rise. Grant touched one finger lightly to the puppy's chest. "No, you've done your part." For once, the puppy seemed too tired to argue. Grant took the fence cutters and closed them around the wire. The first cut snapped loud in the cold. From inside the shed came a rustle, then a low sound that was not quite a growl, not aggression, warning. A mother telling the dark she had nothing left but teeth and would spend them if she had to. Grant stopped with one hand on the door. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, low and steady. He knew words meant little to a frightened dog. Tone mattered more. Posture, space, the decision not to rush. He eased the second loop free and pulled the door open a few inches. The smell came first. Cold straw. Urine. Old wood. Hunger. Fear so thick it seemed to have a temperature. Grant pulled the door wider. His flashlight found the floor, then the walls, then the corner farthest from the wind. A German shepherd mother lay there in a nest of filthy straw and torn burlap. She was too thin, the kind of thin that made the shape of her bones feel like an accusation. Her black saddle lay dull across her back. Wheat gold fur showed along her legs and throat, but grime had flattened its color. Her ears were up, though one edge looked torn. Her eyes, pale amber in the beam, fixed on Grant with a clarity that made him lower the light at once. 3 puppies were pressed against her belly. Small, alive, barely. One moved its head blindly. Another made a mouth shape without sound. The third lay too still until Grant saw the faint rise of its side. The mother tried to stand. Her front legs gathered under her. Her chest lifted. Then her right hind leg failed, and she dropped back into the straw with a sound that cut straight through Grant's ribs. Around the injured leg, the fur was rubbed raw, where something had tightened and stayed there. A wire or cord, not fresh, but not healed. Not fresh. Still, the dog dragged herself forward enough to put her body between Grant and the puppies. Grant knew then that he was looking at something nobler than most monuments. "Easy," he whispered. Behind him, Pip gave a sudden thin cry. The mother's head jerked. Grant turned. Pip had crawled out of the blanket. How he had found the strength, Grant could not have said. The puppy moved over the shed threshold, belly low, the old nursing bottle still lying in the snow behind him like a fallen banner. The mother froze. Pip crawled toward her, every inch an argument against death. Grant did not touch him. He could not. Something in that moment belonged to the dogs alone, and a man entering it too quickly would have been a kind of theft. The mother stretched her neck as far as she could. Pip reached her muzzle. Their noses touched. The sound she made was almost nothing. A breath, a broken exhale. But Grant felt the meaning of it fill the shed. One came back, not victory, not joy, not yet. Account corrected. A piece of the world returned to its place. Pip tucked his head under her chin and went still. Grant looked away for half a second. Not because he was embarrassed by tenderness, because tenderness, when it arrived unarmed, could be harder to face than violence. He drew in a careful breath and began to work. The mother watched every movement. Grant kept his body turned slightly sideways. He spoke without reaching toward her face. He set the flashlight on a beam, so the light angled away from her eyes. He unrolled the blanket, then took off his outer coat and laid it open beside the straw. "I have to move you," he said. "You're not going to like it. I'm not going to like it either. That makes us even." The mother's lips lifted faintly. "Fair." He started with the puppies. One at a time, slowly, letting the mother see his hands, letting her smell the blanket before he touched them. The first puppy was cold enough that Grant's jaw tightened. He tucked it into the wool. The second made a tiny squeak, offended by rescue. The third, the stillest one, gave a faint kick when Grant slid his palm beneath it. "Good," Grant breathed. "Insult me later. Stay alive now." The mother followed his hands with her eyes. When he reached for Pip, she did something that stopped him. She lowered her head. Not fully, not surrender, not trust. Permission, perhaps, or exhaustion wearing the mask of trust. Either way, Grant accepted it like a holy thing and moved the puppy gently beside the others. Now came the hard part. The mother was heavier than she looked, all bone and stubbornness. Grant checked the injured leg without touching it more than he had to. No open bleeding. Swelling, raw skin, possible infection. She needed a vet, warmth, fluids, and more mercy than she had been given. "I'm going to lift you," he told her. Her eyes stayed on his. "I know." He slid one arm beneath her chest and one beneath her hips, keeping the injured leg supported. The mother stiffened. A growl moved through her body, but did not fully leave her throat. Grant waited. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the shed wall. The old tin roof creaked. Pip made a small sound from the blanket. The mother's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Grant. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders changed. It did not vanish. It allowed. Grant lifted. She was lighter than she should have been. That angered him in a clean, cold way. Not the hot anger that made men careless, but the old, deep kind that wrote details down and did not forget. He carried her out of the shed. The snow had thickened. His boots slid once in the yard, and the mother's head came up sharply. Grant corrected, held her tighter, and kept moving. Behind him, he had the puppies bundled against his chest inside the blanket, tied close with the rope like a rough sling. Pip was tucked with them, his small face barely visible. If anyone had seen Grant Rourke crossing the Bellamy yard that morning, they might have thought him absurd. A hard-faced former SEAL in a faded combat shirt and canvas coat, carrying a starving dog mother like a wounded queen, with a bundle of puppies tied to him like contraband from a very small kingdom. Grant would not have argued. He reached his cabin breathing hard, shoulders burning. He nudged the door open with one boot and brought Winter, Straw, and a whole emergency into the room. The cabin changed instantly. Quiet fled. The stove became a sun. The floor became a field hospital. The kitchen table surrendered its dignity. Grant laid the mother near the hearth on layered blankets, close enough to warm, far enough not to overheat. He settled the puppies against her belly. Pip nosed blindly until he found her fur and collapsed there, as if the world had finally stopped moving. The mother did not eat. She did not sleep. She watched Grant, not with gratitude, not yet, with a question. "What are you?" Grant knelt across from her, hands open on his thighs. "Still deciding," he said. Her eyes narrowed, or maybe the firelight moved. Grant stood and reached for his phone. Dr. Lena Whitcomb answered on the fourth ring. Her voice came through clipped by wind and bad reception, calm in the way that made people confess useful information. "Grant, I've got a problem. That sentence from you usually means blood or structural damage." "Dogs." A pause. "How many?" Grant looked at the hearth. The mother lay curled around 4 puppies now, if Pip could be counted among the rescued and not the rescuer. Her ribs moved too quickly. One of the pups rooted weakly. Pip had his paw against the old nursing bottle, which Grant had set near the blanket without thinking. 5, he said. 4 pups and the mother. Lena's voice changed, not dramatic, sharper, awake. Condition? Cold, dehydrated, mother's underweight, right hind leg injured, possible wire wound, pups weak. One walked to my place from Bellamy land. Another pause, shorter this time. Bellamy? Yes. Arthur's farm? Yes. Grant, Arthur is supposed to be in winter care. So people keep saying. He heard her move, drawers opening, metal shifting. Keep them warm, not hot. Don't force-feed the mother. Small amounts of warm fluid if she'll take it. I'm leaving now. Roads are getting bad. Then I'll drive like a Vermonter instead of a fool. The line clicked off. Grant lowered the phone. For a while, he simply stood there, looking at what his cabin had become. A mother dog in the firelight, 3 newborns pressed against her. Pip, impossibly small, asleep with one paw resting on the scratched bottle. Straw melting into wet patches on the floor. His gloves abandoned by the door. His hammer still outside by the fence, useless now in the snow. The mother shifted and winced. Grant crouched but did not touch her. "You need a name," he said quietly. She looked at him with exhausted disdain. "Not from me," he added. "Don't worry, I've learned my lesson today." Pip sighed in his sleep, a tiny, ridiculous sound. Grant's gaze moved to the bottle again, scratched plastic, dried milk. A faint mark under the grime he still could not read. It had been carried out of a locked shed by the weakest creature in it. It had crossed snow, found a man who did not want finding, and returned with him. Grant sat on the floor with his back against the kitchen cabinet. He had not wanted a dog in his house. Now there were 5. The old room did not know what to do with so much breathing. Neither did he. Outside, the storm gathered itself against the windows. Inside, the mother dog kept watch. Pip slept beside the bottle, and Grant Rourke waited for the vet with his hands open and his heart dragged one unwilling inch closer to the living world. Dr. Lena Whitcomb arrived with snow riding her headlights. Grant saw the glow sweep across the cabin wall before he heard the tires crunch over the drive. By then, the room had learned the rhythm of the wounded, the small wet breaths of puppies, the stove ticking in iron patience, the occasional shift of the mother dog when pain reminded her that rest was not the same as safety. Grant opened the door before Lena could knock. She stood on the porch with a canvas medical bag in one hand and a heated carrier in the other. Her parka was navy and dusted white at the shoulders, her brown hair pulled low behind her neck, a few loose strands frozen into damp curves near her face. She had the look of someone who had driven through bad roads often enough to stop being impressed by them. Her eyes went past Grant at once. Where? By the stove? She stepped inside without ceremony. Snow fell from her boots onto the mat. She took in the room in one sweep. Mother dog, 4 puppies, old bottle, towels, melted straw, Grant's coat thrown over a chair, Grant himself standing too still beside the door. "Good," she said. Grant blinked. "This is good? You didn't overheat them. You didn't force-feed her. You didn't try to clean the wound with whiskey or internet confidence." Lena dropped her bag beside the hearth and knelt. "By local standards, we are already ahead of schedule." The mother dog lifted her head. A low warning moved through her chest. Lena stopped with both hands open, palms down, body turned slightly aside. "There you are," she said softly, not sweetly. Lena did not use the sugary voice some people reserved for injured animals. Her tone was level, respectful, almost businesslike. "You've had a vile day, haven't you?" The dog watched her. Grant stayed near the kitchen counter, close enough to move if needed, far enough not to crowd. Lena did not reach for the mother first. She checked the puppies one at a time, moving slowly, narrating just enough for the dog to hear a calm in the room. "Cold but responsive. This one's dehydrated. This one's stronger than he looks. This one is offended by being alive, which I approve of." Pip, nestled against the mother's chest, opened one eye as Lena touched him. "That must be the traveler," she said. "That's Pip." Lena glanced back at Grant. "It's temporary," he said. "Of course." The way she said it made Grant regret speaking at all. Lena weighed each puppy on a small digital scale, then slid a warming pad beneath the blankets, checking the temperature twice with the back of her hand. She mixed formula with the quick precision of someone who knew that tenderness without competence could still kill. The puppies took drops from a feeding tube one by one, tiny mouths working with blind urgency. Only when the pups were settled did Lena turn to the mother. "I need to look at your leg," she told the dog. The mother's ears held high, though one had a small torn notch along the edge. Her ribs showed beneath the dull black saddle of her coat. Under the grime, Grant could see wheat gold fur along her throat and legs. Even wasted, she had a certain order to her. Not beauty exactly, dignity, the kind that did not need witnesses. Lena reached toward the injured hind leg and paused. The dog's lips tightened. Grant felt his muscles answer before his mind did. Lena noticed without looking at him. "Don't." I didn't move. "You were about to." Grant closed his mouth. Lena slipped a soft muzzle from her bag, then set it beside the blanket without putting it on. "I don't think she wants to bite me," she said. "I think she wants me to understand she still can." The mother's eyes remained fixed on Lena. Grant had not known a dog could look ashamed and royal at the same time. Lena examined the leg with patient hands. The wound around the hock was raw, where some kind of cord or wire had bitten through fur. Infection had begun along the edges, but there was no deep bleeding. The joint was swollen, painful, not hopeless. "She was restrained," Lena said. Grant's jaw shifted. "Recently?" "Not today. Maybe days, maybe longer. Hard to tell until I clean it properly." Lena drew up medication. "She's dehydrated and underfed. Milk production is poor. We need fluids, antibiotics, pain control, warmth, careful feeding, and no dramatic heroics from anyone in this room." Grant looked at the dog. The dog looked at him. "Fine," he said. 2 against 1. Lena gave the mother an injection with a speed so smooth the dog barely flinched. Then she set a bowl of warmed broth near her muzzle. The mother sniffed. Did not drink. Pip stirred, dragged himself forward, and bumped his head clumsily against her chin. The mother lowered her nose to him. Then, slowly, she drank. Lena did not smile, but something softened around her eyes. Grant looked away first. There were moments that made a man feel like an intruder in a chapel. Lena worked for nearly an hour. She cleaned the wound. She noted temperatures. She showed Grant how to rotate the puppies gently, so the strongest did not take all the milk when the mother could nurse. She left formula prepared and wrote instructions on the back of an envelope, because Grant's notepad had somehow ended up under a towel soaked with straw melt. Through it all, the old nursing bottle stayed near Pip. Lena noticed it after the 3rd time the puppy shifted his paw onto it. "That yours?" "No." "His?" "Apparently." She picked it up carefully, turning it near the firelight. The plastic had yellowed. A crust of dried milk clung in an old seam. Scratches marked the side like pale little scars. Then Lena stopped. Grant saw it. "What?" She rubbed her thumb over one side of the bottle, clearing a smear of grime. Beneath it, faint but visible, were 2 letters scratched by hand. M.B. Lena went very quiet. Grant felt the room change. "You know it," he said. "I know the initials." Her voice had lost its dry edge. Miriam Bellamy. Grant looked toward the window, though there was nothing outside now but snow and dark glass. Lena held the bottle with more care than before. "She used to keep these in a blue tin by the kitchen stove, different sizes, some for puppies, some for kittens, once for a fawn, if Arthur told the story right, though Miriam always said the fawn had better manners than most men in town." Grant remembered Miriam's apple butter, her laugh through the kitchen screen, Arthur pretending annoyance while carrying feed bags wherever she pointed. She marked everything, Lena said. Not because she was possessive, because things wandered on that farm. Towels, bowls, syringes, husbands. Despite himself, Grant breathed something close to a laugh. The sound startled him. Lena looked at him but did not comment. She set the bottle down near Pip again. The puppy's paw found it in his sleep. For the first time, Grant saw the object differently. Not as evidence, not yet. Not as a strange little relic dragged through snow. It had belonged to a house where weak creatures had once been expected to live. It had been warmed in Miriam Bellamy's hands, rinsed in her sink, probably misplaced under chairs and found in hay, and sworn over when some puppy chewed the nipple beyond use. Pip had carried more than plastic. He had carried the smell of home. Lena reached into her bag. "I want to scan her." Grant nodded toward the mother. "For a chip?" If she belonged to Arthur, she should have one. He chipped every animal after that old hound of his walked 6 miles during a thunderstorm and ended up in a church basement eating communion crackers. "Arthur told you that?" "Arthur told everyone that, twice if they laughed." Lena passed the scanner slowly over the mother's shoulders. Nothing. She adjusted, tried again, moving down the left side of the neck. The scanner beeped. The mother lifted her head. "Easy," Lena murmured. A number appeared on the screen. Grant leaned closer. "Found one?" he asked. "Yes." "That's good." "It should be." Lena entered the number into an app on her phone. The cabin settled into a waiting silence. The little wheel turned on the screen, innocent and infuriating. Then Lena's brow tightened. Grant knew that expression. It was the look of someone seeing a door where there should have been a wall. "What? The record isn't clean." "What does that mean?" "It means there's a current entry, but it doesn't match what I'd expect." She tapped again. "Female German Shepherd, adult, transferred to Second Hearth Rescue. Status listed as voluntary surrender." Grant looked at the mother dog curled around her puppies, her injured leg stretched stiffly beside her. "Voluntary," he said. Lena's mouth flattened. "That is what the field says." "Does it give Arthur's name?" "Not on the current record." But the chip was under her skin. "Yes." "And she was locked in Arthur Bellamy's shed." "Yes." Grant's voice went quieter. "Then either the computer is confused or people are." Lena did not answer at once. She backed out of the current entry and tried another search through an older veterinary database. The signal in the cabin was poor. She moved toward the window, phone raised slightly, as if asking the mountain to be useful for once. The mother dog watched her. Pip slept. The bottle remained beneath his paw. At last Lena said, "There may be archived data. I can't access all of it from here." "Who can?" "Tessa Rowland." Grant waited. "She used to work with the state microchip registry before they outsourced half of it to people who think Vermont is a font choice." Lena scrolled through her contacts. "She freelances now. Data cleanup, vet networks, missing ownership records. Slightly terrifying. Very good." She called. Tessa answered with music in the background and a voice that sounded awake in the way night people often did, bright at odd hours and suspicious of daylight. "Lena, if this is about the goat with 3 owners, I told you the goat legally belongs to whoever it bites least." "Not the goat," Lena said. "I'm sending a chip number." A pause. The music lowered. "What kind of mess?" "German Shepherd female, found on Bellamy property. Current record says Second Hearth voluntary surrender. I need history if you can pull it." Another pause. Grant watched Lena's face as she listened. "No, I don't like it either," Lena said. "Yes, Arthur Bellamy. Yes, that Bellamy." She ended the call and sent the number. "Tessa says she'll look." "How long?" "If the record is ordinary, 10 minutes. If someone has been playing games, longer." Grant looked at the mother dog. What happens until then? We keep them alive. It was a simple answer. It was also, Grant thought, the only honest one. The next hours did not move like hours. They moved like tasks. Warm a towel, check the smallest pup, offer broth, note the time. Let Pip nurse for a few seconds, then help the weaker one. Replace damp bedding, add wood to the stove, wash hands again, listen to the wind. Pretend not to be listening for the phone. Lena stayed. She took off her parka and worked in her dark green scrub top, sleeves pushed to her elbows, a tarnished brass stethoscope hanging from her pocket. She did not ask Grant whether he was all right. People asked that when they wanted either comfort or a lie. Lena seemed to want neither. At one point, Grant found her standing beside the kitchen sink, looking toward the hearth. She knows hand signals, Lena said. Grant followed her gaze. The mother dog's eyes were half closed, but when Lena lifted 2 fingers and gave a small downward motion, the dog's head lowered to the blanket. Grant felt the hair rise along his arms. Try another, Lena said. Grant did not want to. That was why he did. He stepped where the dog could see him. Slowly, he lifted his hand, palm down, then curled 2 fingers inward. A signal old enough that his body remembered before his heart agreed. The mother dog watched. For one breath, nothing happened. Then she shifted her muzzle toward the puppies and settled tighter around them, guarding without panic. Grant's hand fell. Lena's voice was soft. She's been trained. Grant stared at the dog. Not a farm stray, not merely a mother left in a shed. A trained dog. A dog who had once belonged to commands, routines, a person. A dog who had been taught that hands could guide, not just take. The cabin suddenly felt too small for what had happened to her. Near dusk, Tessa called back. Lena put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. I found the older record, Tessa said. Her voice had changed, less joking now. Sharper, threaded with anger, she was trying to keep useful. Registered name, Sable, female German Shepherd. Primary owner, Arthur Bellamy. Secondary emergency contact, Dr. Lena Whitcomb, Hollow Creek Veterinary. Lena's face went still. Grant looked at her. You were listed? Arthur insisted, she said quietly. After Miriam died. Tessa continued. There's a restriction note from 3 years ago. Sable was trained as a veteran support dog. Ownership not to be transferred without direct veterinary confirmation, owner interview, and independent witness. Grant looked at Sable. The name fit. Dark, soft, strong. What does the new record say? He asked. Transferred to Second Hearth Rescue 6 weeks ago, Tessa said. Voluntary surrender due to owner incapacity, witnessed by Second Hearth staff. Arthur signed? There's a digital form that says he did. Lena closed her eyes briefly. Tessa hesitated. There's more. 2 days before the transfer, Arthur requested a hold on any ownership change. Grant's hand tightened on the back of a chair. Why? Tessa exhaled. The note says, owner concerned rescue agency collecting pregnant females under false pretenses. No one spoke. The stove popped once, loud in the silence. Pip woke at the sound and nosed blindly for the bottle. His paw landed on it, and he settled again. Tessa's voice came through smaller now, as if she too understood the room she had entered from, far away. 3 days after that note, the transfer went through. After that, no veterinary updates, no pregnancy care logged, no whelping records, nothing. Lena looked toward the window where snow had begun to gather along the sill. And Arthur? She asked. I can't access human records, Lena. I know. But if he filed that hold himself, he was alert enough to object. Then suddenly he surrendered the dog he was trying to protect. Tessa paused. That doesn't happen cleanly. Grant looked at Sable curled in the firelight, at the puppies pressed to her, at Pip sleeping with Miriam Bellamy's old bottle beneath his paw. All morning he had thought the bottle was a plea. Now it felt like testimony. Lena picked up her phone. "Send me everything you can legally send." "Already doing it." The call ended. The cabin returned to the sound of breathing. Grant sat down slowly on the floor near the hearth, not too close. Sable opened her eyes and watched him. This time, when their gazes met, he did not see only suspicion there. He saw exhaustion. And something else. The weary patience of a creature waiting to learn whether this man would become one more hand that failed her, or the first one that did not. Grant rested his forearms on his knees. "Sable," he said. Her ears moved at the name. Not much. Enough. Pip gave a tiny sigh, rolled toward his mother, and dragged the bottle with him by accident. It bumped against the blanket and came to rest between Grant and Sable. Miriam's initials faced up in the firelight. M.B.A. Dead Woman's Mark. An old man's missing dog. A mother locked in a shed. A puppy who had crossed the snow carrying the only piece of home small enough to hold in his mouth. Grant had spent years believing closed doors were safer. The trouble was, the world kept sending him things that had been locked away. And somehow they kept finding his door. By the next afternoon, the snow had turned beautiful in a way Grant did not trust. It came down lightly, almost politely, drifting past the cabin windows in silver-white threads. The kind of snow tourists loved in postcards and locals eyed like a salesman with clean shoes. It softened the woodpile, dressed the pines, and made even the ruts in Grant's driveway look harmless. Inside, nothing was harmless. Sable lay near the stove on fresh blankets, her injured hind leg wrapped in clean gauze. Dr. Lena Whitcomb had returned before dawn to check the wound, adjust medication, and leave Grant with a list of instructions long enough to qualify as scripture. The puppies slept in a huddle against their mother's belly. Pip, smaller than the rest and twice as opinionated, had claimed Miriam Bellamy's old nursing bottle as if it were a family sword. Grant had set up the room like a quiet little triage ward. Towels warmed near the stove. A pan of water added moisture to the dry air. Formula stood cooling on the counter beside a thermometer, syringes, and Lena's handwritten feeding chart. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, milk, antiseptic, wet straw, and the unmistakable effort of keeping fragile lives attached to the earth. Grant had slept maybe 40 minutes in a chair. He was rinsing a feeding tube at the sink when a vehicle slowed outside. Not Lena's truck. Grant knew hers by sound now, an impatient engine, tires that complained honestly, one belt squeal at the first cold start. This vehicle purred up the drive as if winter had been arranged for its convenience. He looked through the window. A dark blue SUV rolled to a stop beside the woodpile. Clean. Too clean for a rural Vermont road after snow. A white logo curved across the driver's door, a simple roofline over a paw print wrapped in the words, "Second Hearth Rescue." Grant turned off the faucet. Sable lifted her head. That was the first thing he noticed. Not the vehicle, not the logo. Sable. Her ears rose, though pain slowed the movement. Her body tightened around the puppies. Pip woke and made a small, confused sound. Then he dragged himself beneath the low edge of the coffee table, the nursing bottle clenched crookedly in his mouth. Grant dried his hands. The man who stepped out of the SUV looked like the sort of person local news anchors thanked by first name. Nolan Greer was 56, medium-built, neatly dressed, and polished in a way that did not belong to emergency work. His Navy rescue jacket carried the Second Hearth logo over the left chest. A pale gray scarf was tucked carefully at his throat. His boots were practical but nearly spotless. His silver blonde hair had been combed back so smoothly the wind seemed embarrassed to disturb it. He carried a leather folder under one arm. He paused at the foot of the porch, looked up at Grant through the glass, and smiled. Not wide, not false enough to be useful. Warm. That was the problem. Grant opened the door before Nolan could knock. "Mr. Rourke," Nolan said, as if they had met at a fundraiser and merely misplaced the memory. "I'm Nolan Greer, director of Second Hearth Rescue." "I read the car." A slight pause. Then Nolan smiled again. "I imagine you've had a difficult 24 hours. Grant stood in the doorway. "You imagine a lot from the porch." Nolan looked past him, not rudely, just enough to see warmth, blankets, movement near the stove. "May I come in?" "No." This time the pause was longer. Snow settled softly on Nolan's shoulders. He did not appear offended. If anything, he looked saddened by Grant's mistrust, which Grant suspected was a practiced expression stored near the top shelf. "Of course," Nolan said. "You're protecting animals in distress. I respect that." Grant said nothing. "I was informed that a German Shepherd female and a litter of puppies were removed from Bellamy property yesterday," Nolan continued. "I'm grateful someone found them before the storm worsened. Truly. But they are under Second Hearth's legal care." Sable's breathing changed behind Grant. He did not turn. "Legal care," Grant repeated. "Yes. Arthur Bellamy voluntarily surrendered the dog weeks ago when he entered winter respite care. We have documentation." The words were calm, sensible, padded with concern. Grant thought of Sable in the shed, her leg raw where restraint had eaten through fur. He thought of 3 puppies barely alive in filthy straw. He thought of Pip crossing snow with a bottle too large for his mouth. "Your care has an interesting smell," he said. Nolan's eyes flicked once, there and gone. "I understand how this must look," Nolan said, "but rescue work is rarely clean. Animals bolt. Foster placements fail. Rural properties become complicated. We've been looking for this dog since she escaped transport." "Escaped transport?" "Yes. With newborn puppies." Nolan sighed gently. "Mr. Rourke, I know you have a military background. Men with your training tend to see patterns quickly, sometimes too quickly." Grant felt something cold move up the back of his neck. Nolan kept his voice soft. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to make sure the animals receive proper care and the legal process is respected." From inside the cabin came a small scrape. Pip had shifted under the coffee table. The old bottle knocked once against the floor. Nolan's gaze moved toward the sound. For the first time since arriving, his smile forgot itself. Only for a second. Grant saw it anyway. "You know that bottle," Grant said. Nolan looked back at him. "I know a number of supplies from the Bellamy farm were used in animal care over the years." That wasn't the question. Nolan's face settled into sympathy again, smoother than before. "Mr. Rourke, grief can attach meaning to objects. Arthur was very attached to the past, Miriam's things, old routines. Sometimes older veterans struggle when a service animal ages or becomes pregnant or needs more care than they can provide. It's painful, but our job is to step in before sentiment becomes neglect." Grant did not move. That was Nolan's gift, Grant realized. He could wrap a knife in a blanket and make you thank him for the warmth. Behind Grant, Sable shifted. Her body rose half an inch, front legs bracing, pain making her tremble. She could not stand. Still, she placed herself more fully between Nolan's voice and her puppies. Grant looked down just enough to see her. There were papers in Nolan's folder. There were records in Tessa's files. There would be procedures, signatures, offices, phone calls. But Sable's body had already filed its testimony. Grant stepped onto the porch and pulled the door partly closed behind him, leaving only a narrow gap. "The dog is under veterinary care," he said. "You can contact Dr. Lena Whitcomb." Nolan's brow lifted with mild regret. Doctor. Whitcomb has always cared deeply, sometimes too deeply. It makes her admirable, but not always objective. You'll want to choose your next words carefully. The warmth left Nolan's eyes, though his mouth kept its shape. I could involve county authorities. Do that? I could report unlawful possession of surrendered animals. Do that, too. Mr. Rourke? No. Nolan's folder tightened under his arm. Grant leaned forward slightly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You're not coming inside. You're not touching that dog. You're not touching those pups. And if you send someone else without Lena or a deputy present, they'll have a very educational conversation with my front gate. For the first time, Nolan looked at the man instead of the situation. Perhaps he saw the olive combat shirt beneath the canvas coat, the shoulders, the stillness, the sort of calm that did not come from peace, but from having already met fear and found it loud. Nolan nodded once. I hope you don't make this harder than it needs to be. Grant looked at the clean SUV, the white logo, the snow collecting like innocence over the hood. Funny, he said. I was about to tell you the same thing. Nolan turned to leave. At the bottom of the porch steps, he glanced back through the narrow gap in the door. Not at Sable, not at Grant, at Pip. The puppy had crawled just far enough from beneath the table to be visible. The nursing bottle hung from his mouth, the scratched plastic catching stove light. Pip's legs shook beneath him, but he held on. Nolan's expression changed again. This time, not irritation, recognition, and under it, something close to fear. Then the smile returned, late and useless. Good afternoon, Mr. Rourke. Grant watched the SUV reverse down the drive, clean tires cutting through snow that had no idea what kind of man it was carrying. He waited until it disappeared beyond the pines before he went back inside. Sable lowered herself slowly. Pip dropped the bottle with a tiny clatter and collapsed beside it, exhausted by his own act of defiance. Grant crouched near him. You're very dramatic for someone who weighs less than my boot. Pip closed his eyes. Grant touched one finger to the bottle, turning it so the faint MB faced up. The room felt different now. Warmer, yes, but also marked. Nolan hadn't come to retrieve neglected animals. He had come to retrieve a story before it learned to speak. That evening, the first person to arrive was not Lena. A woman in a plum-colored cardigan and a quilted green coat stood on Grant's porch with a cloth tote bag hugged to her chest like a shield. She was in her early 60s, short, round-faced, with silver-brown curls escaping from a wooden hair clip. Snow had collected on her shoulders, and she looked at the door as if half hoping Grant would not answer. He did. Grant Rourke? Yes. I'm Marla Keene. She swallowed. I used to volunteer with Second Hearth. Grant did not invite her in immediately. Marla noticed. Her eyes moved past him toward the firelit room, then back to his face. They were kind eyes, but tired from carrying something too long. I heard Sable was found, she said. From who? Lena. Marla looked down at the tote bag. It had an old Second Hearth logo printed on it, faded and cracked, the same roofline, the same paw print, but softer somehow, less polished. She didn't tell me where. I asked around. Hollow Creek is small, and I am, unfortunately, persistent. Grant waited. Marla's hands tightened on the bag. I helped start that rescue, not legally, not on paper. I just washed kennels and fostered old dogs and made soup for meetings when we still had meetings in church basements instead of donor rooms. The bitterness in her voice surprised him because it was directed inward. It used to be good, she said. That's the part I need you to understand before I say the ugly things. Second Hearth used to be good. Second Hearth. Grant opened the door wider. Marla stepped inside and saw Sable. Her breath caught. "Oh," she whispered. Sable watched her from the blankets, but did not growl. Pip slept against his mother's chest. The other puppies twitched in their small dreams. Marla pressed one hand to her mouth. "I told Arthur to trust them," she said. Grant said nothing. That was before Nolan changed everything, or maybe before I admitted he had. She sank into the chair nearest the door, still holding the tote. Pregnant females started disappearing from records. Older mothers were listed as transferred to rehabilitation farms I never saw. Puppies appeared on donation posts within days. Beautiful pictures, warm blankets, little captions about hope. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back with a kind of stubborn embarrassment. "I asked questions," she said. "He told me I was tired, sentimental, that I didn't understand modern rescue metrics. I let him make me feel old instead of angry." Grant recognized that kind of manipulation, not because it was clever, because it was common. Men like Nolan did not always break doors. Sometimes they simply convinced the person holding the key that their hands were shaking too badly to use it. Marla opened the tote and pulled out a folder. Not dramatic, not secret agent neat, just a battered yellow folder with receipts, printed screenshots, copied transport logs, names circled in blue pen. "I don't know what's useful," she said, "but I kept things." Grant took the folder. Sable shifted, and Marla looked at the dog with a grief so plain it needed no decoration. "I'm sorry," Marla said to her. Sable did not forgive her. Sable did not understand the words. But after a moment, she lowered her head again. That was not absolution. It was only exhaustion. Marla seemed to know the difference, and it hurt her properly. The second visitor came after dark. Grant found him at the end of the driveway, unwilling to approach the cabin lights. The man was 70 or so, thin as a fence rail, wearing an old gray wool coat and a veteran's cap pulled low. Snow gathered on the brim. In one hand he held a leash so faded the original color had become a matter for historians. "Harold Pike," he said when Grant walked down to meet him. Grant knew the name vaguely. Army. Vietnam-era family, though Harold himself had served later. Lived alone on County Road 6. Bought coffee at Doyle's and left before anyone sat too close. "Marla called me," Harold said. His voice scraped like gravel under ice. "Said you found Bellamy's dog." Grant nodded. Harold looked past him toward the cabin. "I had a dog, old girl, Maggie, lab mix, bad hips, worst breath, best thing in my house." Grant did not interrupt. "Second Hearth said they could place her with a medical foster for winter. Said I wasn't failing her. Said signing was the loving thing." Harold's jaw worked. "That's how they get you, you know. They don't say you're useless. They say you're noble for stepping aside." Snow moved between them. Harold lifted the leash slightly. She never came back. Grant looked at the strip of worn leather in the old man's hand. "Did you ask?" "For 6 months." Harold gave a small, hard laugh. "Then I stopped. A man can only be politely handled so many times before he starts believing he deserves it." The words stayed in the cold. Grant thought of Arthur, of Sable, of Pip with the bottle, of Nolan's clean smile. "Why come now?" Grant asked. Harold's eyes moved to the cabin window, where warm light held against the snow. "Because Marla said there were puppies," he answered, "and because shame is a poor blanket. Keeps nothing warm." Grant did not offer comfort. Some confessions did not want to be patted like nervous dogs. They wanted to be heard and left standing. So he said, "Come inside." Harold shook his head. "Not tonight. If I see them, I might lose my nerve." He handed Grant a folded paper. "Copy of what I signed. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't." Grant took it. Harold turned to leave, then stopped. "Tell Bellamy," he said, "if you find him, that he wasn't the only fool. Grant watched him walk back toward the road, the empty leash swinging lightly from one hand. Later, long after Marla had gone and Harold's tire tracks had begun to soften under new snow, Grant sat at the kitchen table with the yellow folder, Harold's paper, and Tessa's printed record spread before him. None of it was enough yet. It was too scattered, too human. Grief in receipts, shame in signatures, missing dogs reduced to line items, pregnant mothers called transfers, old men praised for surrendering the only warm thing left in their houses. Near the stove, Sable slept uneasily. Pip woke, nosed the nursing bottle, and dragged it 3 inches closer to Grant's boot before collapsing again. Grant looked down. The bottle lay beside him like an accusation too small for a courtroom and too heavy for a man to ignore. Nolan had wanted the dog. He had wanted the puppies. But when he saw that bottle, something in him had gone still. Grant picked it up. The scratched plastic was warm now from the room, not cold from the snow. MB showed faintly beneath his thumb. "What are you afraid of?" he murmured. Pip, being unhelpful, sneezed in his sleep. Grant almost smiled. Then he looked at Sable, at the puppies, at the folder Marla had carried like penance, at Harold's folded paper on the table. Outside, Hollow Creek slept beneath a gentle snow. Inside, the story Nolan Greer had tried to keep buried began, very quietly, to gather witnesses. For 2 days, the old nursing bottle moved through Grant Rourke's cabin like a stubborn little ghost. Pip carried it badly. That was part of the trouble. His mouth was too small, the rubber nipple too chewed, the plastic too wide for any dignity. He would grip it, drag it 3 feet, lose balance, fall on his side, sneeze, then rise with the solemn determination of a knight who had misplaced both horse and helmet. Grant told himself the bottle was only comfort, a scent object, something familiar from the Bellamy shed. Milk, straw, Sable, old hands, old rooms. Lena said it made sense. Puppies attached to scent before they attached to reason, and Pip had survived by holding on to what smelled like home. Still, the habit unsettled Grant. Pip dragged the bottle from the blanket nest to the back door, then from the back door to Sable. Later, when Grant sat at the kitchen table sorting Marla's folder, Pip placed it against the leg of his chair. When Harold Pike's copy of the surrender agreement lay open beneath the lamp, Pip nosed the bottle until it rolled against the paper. "Not everything is a message," Grant muttered. Pip stared at him. Grant stared back. "You're 7 weeks old. You don't get to look disappointed in me." Pip blinked, unimpressed, then hiccuped. The cabin had changed in ways Grant could no longer pretend were temporary. A feeding schedule hung beside the stove. Puppy formula occupied the place where his coffee tin used to sit. Clean towels were stacked on the chair by the hearth, which meant Grant had eaten standing up twice because disturbing the towel system felt like offending a religion. Sable remained weak, but steadier. She watched every movement, but the sharp edge in her eyes had begun to soften when Grant approached with broth. Not trust. Recognition, perhaps. The kind that said, "You have not failed us today. We will discuss tomorrow when it arrives." That evening, snow pressed against the windows in wet flakes. Lena had come by after clinic hours, carrying more antibiotics and a paper bag with 2 sandwiches because, as she said, "You look like a man who thinks coffee is a food group." Grant had eaten one without thanking her properly. Lena had accepted this as gratitude. Now she sat near the hearth in her dark green scrub top, sleeves pushed up, brass stethoscope glinting from her pocket. She was checking Sable's leg while Grant rinsed the nursing bottle at the sink. "Don't scrub it too hard," Lena said. "I'm cleaning dried milk out of an antique crime scene." "Exactly. Be respectful." Grant turned the bottle under warm water. "You always talk to evidence like it has feelings?" "When evidence has been chewed by a puppy and owned by Miriam Bellamy, yes." The bottle slipped slightly in his hand. He caught it, then frowned. Something had moved. Not outside the bottle. Inside the base. Grant held it up to the light over the sink. The bottom was thicker than he remembered. A faint seam circled it, almost invisible beneath scratches and age. Lena. She looked over. He turned the bottle slowly. Did Miriam's bottles have double bottoms? No. Lena stood. Grant dried the bottle and set it on the table. Lena came beside him, her expression narrowing into the look she wore before saying something no one wanted to hear. She took the bottle and ran her thumbnail along the seam. "There are pry marks," she said. "Old? Not factory, not from chewing." She looked toward the hearth, where Pip had lifted his head as if someone had insulted his property. "Someone opened this before." Grant got a thin blade from the drawer. Lena held the bottle steady while he worked the edge into the seam. The plastic resisted, then gave with a small, brittle click. Pip barked once. It was so tiny and offended that both humans froze. Sable raised her head. Grant looked at Pip. "This yours?" Pip attempted to stand and failed. His expression suggested the answer was obvious, and humans were exhausting. Grant eased the base free. Inside was a narrow hollow, and inside the hollow, wrapped in a small twist of clear plastic, was a rolled piece of paper. For a moment, no one moved. The stove clicked. One of the puppies squeaked in its sleep. Lena's hand went slowly to her mouth. Grant lifted the plastic-wrapped note out with 2 fingers. It was dry, carefully folded. The paper had been torn from something larger, maybe a ledger sheet or old stationery. His name was not on it. No one's name was. Only a few words written in a shaky hand that looked as if each letter had been dragged uphill. Lantern Pike Motel. Room behind office. If Sable's pups live, she found help. Grant read it once, then again. The second time, the words landed harder, not because they were dramatic. They were not. No long accusation, no list of crimes, no plea for vengeance. Just a place, a room, and a sentence that sounded less like hope than a man measuring his last chance and folding it small enough to hide. Lena reached for the back of a chair. "Arthur," she whispered. Grant looked at the bottle. The old object seemed heavier now, absurdly heavier, as if the plastic had remembered everything it carried and finally allowed itself to weigh something. "He put it there," Grant said. Lena nodded slowly. "He must have known Sable would keep it near the pups. Miriam used these for every orphan she brought in. If Sable was nesting, she would know the smell. She would bring it close." Pip didn't know. No? Lena looked at the tiny puppy watching them from the blankets. Pip just held on to home. Grant's throat tightened. That was worse somehow. Better and worse. No miracle, no secret intelligence, just a puppy clinging to the one object that smelled safe, and by doing so, carrying an old man's message through snow. Pip lowered his chin onto his paws, exhausted by the burden of being correct. Grant folded the note back into the plastic. "We need a deputy," Lena said. "Not county dispatch." "No?" Her mouth tightened. May Calder. Grant knew the name. Everyone in Hollow Creek did, though not always in the same tone. Deputy May Calder had a way of making people drive slower without hiding behind billboards. She wrote tickets to donors, corrected the sheriff in public when he deserved it, and once escorted a town selectman out of Doyle's diner because he would not stop shouting at a waitress. Grant had never heard her raise her voice. That made her more dangerous than men who did. Lena called her. May arrived 40 minutes later in a brown sheriff's parka, snow caught along the brim of her black knit cap. She was 51, with a steady walk and a face built for weather, square jaw, dark eyes, short black hair streaked with silver where it showed beneath the cap. A red-brown notebook was already in her hand when Grant opened the door. "I'm off shift," she said. Grant stepped aside. May entered, saw Sable, the puppies, Pip, Lena, the papers on the table, and the open bottle. "Which means this had better ruin my night properly," she finished. Lena handed her the note. May read it standing beside the table. Once, then she read it again, slower. No one spoke. That was the thing about May. She did not ask questions just to fill silence. She let facts stand where they were until people became uncomfortable enough to move honestly around them. "Who opened the bottle?" she asked. "Grant," Lena said. "I was here." "Where was it found?" Grant told her. May wrote in the red notebook. "Who has touched the note?" "Me," Grant said, "with fingers." May glanced at him. He looked back. "I didn't know it was evidence when the puppy was using it as furniture." A corner of her mouth moved. Almost. "Fair." May placed the note on a clean plastic sleeve Lena gave her. "I've had Second Hearth on the edge of my desk for a year." Lena looked up sharply. "You never said." "I had suspicions. Suspicions are not warrants." May's voice stayed even, but the words carried frustration worn smooth from long use. Every complaint came wrapped in shame or grief. People signed things. Witnesses belonged to the organization. Donors liked the numbers. My boss liked the donors. And Nolan Greer smiles like a church bulletin. Grant sat down opposite her. May looked at Harold's surrender paper, Marla's folder, Tessa's printed chip record. "This is more than I had yesterday." "Is it enough?" Grant asked. May did not answer quickly. He respected that. "Not alone," she said at last, "but it gives direction. Lantern Pike Motel has come up twice in unrelated calls, noise complaints, welfare checks that got canceled before we arrived, a private transport vehicle seen there after midnight. Nothing actionable. Nothing clean. Arthur may be there. Maybe." Grant heard the caution, and it angered him because it was necessary. May turned to Lena. "Can you verify Sable's condition in writing?" "Already started." "Tessa's records?" "She'll send what she can legally release." "Marla?" Grant tapped the yellow folder. She kept transport logs, donation screenshots, receipts. May looked at the folder as if it might bite. "Good woman, late, but good." The sentence held no cruelty, only fact. Near the hearth, Sable shifted. Pip woke again, wobbling to his feet with the determined misery of the very young. He left the blanket nest and toddled toward Grant. The room watched him as if he were crossing a frozen lake. He reached the table leg, bumped into Grant's boot, and dropped his chin onto the old bottle base that lay near the floor. There was no message in it now. The message had been removed. Still, Pip stayed with it. Grant felt something inside him shift, not gently. For days he had thought his part was emergency work. Worm the puppy, move the mother, call Lena, keep things alive until qualified people took over. That was a clean role, temporary, useful, but clean roles had a way of becoming excuses. Rourke had not died because Grant lacked skill. Rourke had died because Grant had believed speed and certainty were the same thing. Since then, he had punished himself by refusing anything that might love him enough to step between him and harm. Now Pip had done exactly that in miniature. Not by taking a blast, not by charging danger, by spending his whole small body to carry a bottle from a locked shed to the one man nearby who still knew how to listen to a dog. Grant looked at May. What happens next? May closed her notebook. I make calls, carefully. I don't tip Nolan unless I have to. I check Lantern Pike through property records, complaints, permits, anything that gets me legal ground. I ask the sheriff for emergency review. And if he refuses? He won't refuse on paper. He'll delay. Grant knew the difference. May did too. "He has donors breathing on his neck," she said. "Second Hearth makes the county look compassionate without costing the county much. People like compassion best when someone else pays for it." Lena gave a humorless laugh. May looked at Grant. "You give me everything. You do not go to Lantern Pike alone." Grant said nothing. May waited. Lena turned toward him. "Grant." He looked down at Pip, at the bottle base beneath the puppy's chin, at the note now sealed away in plastic. He thought of Arthur's handwriting, of Sable's reaction to Nolan's voice, of Harold standing in the driveway with the empty leash, of Marla saying, "It used to be good," as if goodness itself had been stolen from her house. He could hand the evidence to May and step back. He could close the door, tend the dogs, tell himself he had done more than most people would. That would even be true. But truth, he had learned, could still be too small. "I'm not going alone," he said. May's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm going with you." "That is not how this works." "It might be tonight." "No?" Grant leaned back. "You need someone who knows the Bellamy property. Someone Sable trusts enough to stay alive for. Someone Arthur might recognize if he's scared or drugged, and if there are dogs there." "I have animal control." "Do you?" May did not answer. The storm tapped at the windows. Grant kept his voice low. "I'm not asking to play hero. I've buried enough of that word, but Pip did his part. Sable did hers. Arthur tried to do his. I'm not leaving the rest to a phone tree and a polite delay." May studied him for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook. "I did not authorize you to interfere in law enforcement activity," she said. "Understood. I did not invite you to a motel." "Clear. If later you happen to be reachable when I need someone familiar with the animals, that would be a separate issue." Grant nodded once. Lena sighed. That was legally hideous. May put the notebook away. It was legally Vermont. Her radio crackled once at her shoulder. She turned it down. Then her phone buzzed. May checked the screen, and whatever she saw erased the small trace of humor from her face. "What?" Lena asked. May was already moving toward the door. "Lantern Pike filed a plow exemption for tonight. Private road access. Large vehicle departure before the storm closure." Grant stood. May looked back at him. "Nolan's moving something," he said. "Or someone," May answered. The room grew very still. Behind them, Pip gave a tiny whine and pressed his paw against the hollow base of the bottle. May opened the door. Snow and cold swept in. "I need 1 hour," she said. "Maybe less." Grant reached for his coat. Lena looked at him, then at Sable and the puppies. "I'll stay with them," she said. Grant paused. Sable's amber eyes were on him. She did not rise. She could not. But she watched as if some part of her understood that doors mattered, that men leaving could mean abandonment or return depending on what kind of men they were. Grant crouched and placed the bottle base beside Pip. "I'm coming back," he said. The words were for the puppy, for Sable, for himself, maybe most of all. Then he followed May into the falling snow, while behind him the cabin held its fragile kingdom of breath and warmth. And the first true shape of Arthur Bellamy's warning began to emerge from the dark. The storm came down over Hollow Creek like a curtain being drawn by a hand that wanted no witnesses. Snow erased the shoulder of the road. It softened the black pines into pale towers and swallowed the last porch lights along the edge of town. By the time Deputy May Calder turned off the county road toward Lantern Pike, her patrol SUV was moving through a world reduced to headlights, wipers, and the red pulse of the emergency bar reflecting against the snow. Grant sat in the passenger seat with both hands resting on his knees. He had been in worse weather, worse places, worse silences. Still, this silence had its own teeth. Behind them, Dr. Lena Whitcomb followed in her veterinary truck, driving close enough that her headlights stayed in May's mirror. Marla Keene rode with Lena because she knew the old layout of Second Hearth storage units and transport routes. Marla had drawn the motel's rough shape on the back of an envelope before they left. Office in front, rooms in an L shape, service shed behind, delivery lane along the east side. "Do not improvise," May said. Grant looked at her. May kept her eyes on the road. Her short hair, streaked silver at the temples, was tucked beneath a black knit cap. The red-brown notebook sat closed in the console between them, as if even paper had agreed to be quiet. "I mean it," she said. "You are here because you know Arthur, because Sable may respond to you, and because Lena may need help with animals. You are not here to become a weather-related legal problem." "I heard you the first time." "I'm repeating it because men like you often mistake hearing for obeying." Grant almost smiled. Almost. A mile ahead, a weak neon sign flickered through the snow. Lantern Pike Motel. Half the letters were dark. The remaining ones blinked in uneven red and blue, making the sign look less like an invitation than a tired eye refusing to close. The motel sat off the road in a shallow hollow, low and long, with old green doors facing a cracked parking lot. A covered office stood at the front, its windows glowing yellow. Beyond the main row, half hidden behind a stand of spruce, a metal service shed hunched under a load of snow. A white box truck idled near the shed. Its rear doors were open. May killed the headlights before they reached the lot. "There," Grant said. "I see it." "No markings." "I see that too." May stopped behind a row of snow-heavy shrubs and picked up her radio. She spoke low, clean, and official, notifying dispatch of her location and requesting backup for an emergency welfare check and suspected unlawful transport of animals and vulnerable adults. Her voice did not shake. It also did not waste a word. Then she looked at Grant. "Stay behind me." Grant nodded. This time, he meant it. They stepped into the storm. Cold hit Grant's face like wet stone. Snow filled the air so thickly the motel seemed to appear and disappear with every gust. Lena pulled in behind them and hurried over, medical bag slung across her shoulder, parka hood drawn tight. Marla climbed out more slowly, clutching her faded Second Hearth tote with both hands. Her face looked pale under the lot light, but she did not turn back. "Office first," May said. They crossed the lot. A bell jingled weakly when May pushed open the office door. Warm air rolled out, smelling of stale coffee, carpet cleaner, old cigarettes, and something medicinal underneath. A man behind the counter rose too quickly. He was in his 30s, thin, with a patchy beard and a motel sweatshirt stretched over nervous shoulders. "We're closed for weather," he said. May showed her badge. Deputy called her. Emergency welfare check. His eyes jumped to Grant, then Lena, then Marla. "I don't know anything about—" May placed a paper on the counter. "You don't know what I'm asking yet." That stopped him. Grant saw the man's throat move. From somewhere behind the office wall came a sound, not loud, a cough, old, dry, human. May heard it too. Her face changed by nothing anyone in town would have noticed. Grant noticed. "Room behind the office," she said. The man's hands opened, closed. "That's storage." "Open it." "I don't have—" May leaned forward. Her voice stayed calm enough to freeze water. "Choose your next sentence carefully." He chose silence. The key ring trembled in his hand as he led them through a narrow side hallway lined with stacked paper towels and broken lamps. At the end stood a door with a deadbolt on the outside. May looked at it, then at him. "Storage," she said. He did not answer. The key turned. The room inside was small and overheated, with a low bed, a plastic chair, a humming space heater, and curtains drawn tight over the window. On the nightstand sat a paper cup of water, 2 orange prescription bottles, and a stack of documents clipped neatly together. Arthur Bellamy sat on the edge of the bed in a robe that did not belong to him. He looked smaller than Grant remembered. Not simply thinner, reduced. As if someone had folded him badly and left him in a drawer. His white hair stood in wisps around his head. His cheeks had hollowed. A green wool cap lay on the pillow beside him, the same one Grant had seen across the Bellamy pasture for years. But his eyes were open, clouded by exhaustion. Yes, not empty. May stepped in first. "Mr. Bellamy, I'm Deputy Calder. Do you know where you are?" Arthur turned his head slowly. "Bad motel," he said. Grant let out a breath he had not known he was holding. May's expression softened by a single degree. "That's accurate enough." Arthur's gaze moved past her and found Grant. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the old man's mouth trembled. "Rourke?" "Yeah." Arthur blinked hard. "You brought the weather with you?" Grant's throat tightened despite himself. "Thought the place needed atmosphere." A broken laugh escaped Arthur, then collapsed into a cough. Lena moved at once, checking his pulse, pupils, breathing. May photographed the room, the outside lock, the documents, the medication bottles. Grant stood near the bed, unsure where to put his hands. Arthur looked at him with sudden urgency. "Sable." "She's alive." The old man closed his eyes. "The pups?" "Alive." Arthur's face broke then, not loudly, not in a way that asked anyone to comfort him. Tears simply slipped into the deep lines beside his nose, and he covered his mouth with one shaking hand. Grant reached into his coat pocket. He had brought the nursing bottle because leaving it behind had felt wrong. Pip had objected so fiercely when Grant took it that Lena had finally wrapped the puppy in a towel, tucked him inside a heated carrier with Sable nearby, and told him, "Your artifact is on loan." Grant held the bottle out. Arthur saw it. His hand rose as if from underwater. "Miriam?" he whispered. Grant placed the bottle in his lap. Arthur touched the faint initials with his thumb. His fingers shook so badly the plastic clicked against his wedding ring. "I thought maybe," he said. "If Sable got loose, she always took this one to the nest. Miriam used to say, every mother needs a tool and an audience." He tried to laugh. Couldn't. "I put the note in there when they brought me here. One of Nolan's boys left my bag near the chair. Thought an old man couldn't do much with 5 minutes and a pocket knife." May looked up from the documents. "What did Nolan want you to sign?" Arthur's eyes hardened with effort. "Farm transfer, care reimbursement, Sable's surrender, more pages every day." He said I was confused, said I owed him for winter care, said no one could manage Bellamy land anymore except someone with vision. Marla made a small sound from the doorway. Arthur turned. For a moment, grief passed between them like a candle being carried through a dark room. "Marla," he said. She pressed the tote to her chest. "Arthur, I am so sorry." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Be sorry later. Help now." Marla nodded, tears spilling freely, and this time she did not wipe them away. From outside came the metallic slam of a truck door. Grant's head turned. May was already moving. "Lena, stay with Arthur. Marla, with me. Grant." "I know. Behind you." They went back into the storm. The box truck near the service shed had its engine running harder now. 2 men were loading wire crates into the back. The barking inside was thin and frantic. Not many dogs, but enough. Too many for the night. Too many for one more polite explanation. Nolan Greer stood near the shed door in a long charcoal coat, speaking into a phone. The storm had touched him less than it touched everyone else. Somehow, even in that weather, he looked arranged. May crossed the lot with her badge out. "Nolan Greer." Nolan turned. His face registered surprise, then concern, then careful disappointment, each expression arriving in proper order, like guests at a fundraiser. "Deputy Calder," he said, "this is unfortunate timing." "It is." "We're relocating animals ahead of the storm closure. I filed the road exemption." "You filed it under emergency veterinary transport." "That's correct." "Where's the veterinarian?" Nolan glanced toward the truck. "On call." May's voice did not rise. "Open the shed." "I'm afraid you're interfering with lawful rescue operations." May stepped closer. "Open the shed." The two men by the truck stopped loading. Grant stood slightly behind May, snow collecting on his shoulders. He looked past Nolan through the half-open shed door and saw cages stacked along one wall, bags of feed, clipboards, plastic donation signs with smiling puppies printed across them. Then he heard it, a puppy crying. Not one of Sable's. Older, maybe. But the sound moved through him all the same. From behind them, Lena's truck door opened. Grant turned sharply. "Lena!" he called. But it was not Lena who had stepped down first. Sable stood in the open side door of the heated veterinary truck. How she had gotten her front paws under her, Grant did not know. She was wrapped in a blanket, one hind leg braced awkwardly, body shaking with pain and weakness. Pip was pressed against Lena's arm inside the truck, the tiny puppy fighting to see past the edge of the carrier. Lena appeared behind Sable, one hand under the dog's chest. "She heard them," Lena said, breathless. "I couldn't keep her down without hurting her." Sable took one trembling step. Grant moved faster than thought. He reached her before she could try another, dropped to one knee in the snow, and placed both hands gently against her chest. "No," he said. Sable pushed weakly against him, eyes fixed on the shed. "No," Grant said again, softer. "Not this time." She trembled under his hands. Behind him, Nolan said, "That dog is evidence of exactly what I've been saying. Unstable, improperly handled." Grant did not look back. He kept his eyes on Sable. "You did enough," he told her. "You got him out. You got Pip out. You kept them alive. Now we do the rest." Sable's breath came fast. Her amber eyes searched his face, wild with pain and purpose. Grant felt something open in him that he had kept sealed for years. He had once let a dog pay the price for his mistake. He would not let another dog spend her broken body because humans had failed to act. "Stay," he whispered. It was not a command from a handler. It was a promise from a man trying at last to become worthy of being obeyed. Sable sank against him, not collapsing, yielding. Lena crouched beside them and wrapped the blanket tighter around the dog. Pip, from inside the carrier, gave a tiny sound and bit down on the nursing bottle with all the fury of a damp biscuit. May had watched only long enough to understand. Then she turned back to Nolan. "Open the shed," she said, "or I open it and add obstruction." Nolan's smile was gone now. Without it, his face looked smaller. May signaled to the motel clerk, who had followed them outside and looked ready to dissolve into the snow. "Keys." He handed them over. Inside the shed, the truth did not roar. It shivered. 6 dogs in crates. 2 older, one with cloudy eyes. A nursing mother without puppies. 3 young dogs trembling under thin bedding. Along the back table sat folders labeled with names Grant recognized from Marla's notes and Harold's surrender form. Donation flyers showed bright-eyed puppies beside fake hearths. Shipping receipts listed destinations under vague labels: foster partner, rehabilitation hold, private placement. Marla stood in the doorway and looked at the paper signs. Her face crumpled, not from surprise, but recognition. "I made that first logo," she said faintly. "We used to put it on soup labels for fundraisers." May pulled gloves from her pocket. "Photograph everything." Lena moved from crate to crate, checking each animal quickly. Grant stayed with Sable until she stopped shaking, then helped carry one older dog into Lena's truck. The work steadied him. Lift, support, breathe. Do not rage where hands are needed. Nolan attempted one last version of himself. "Deputy, you're misreading operational documents. These animals were being moved before road closure. Mr. Bellamy's care agreement?" May held up Arthur's unsigned transfer papers from the office room, still clipped and waiting. Arthur Bellamy did not consent to tonight's transport. "He's not competent." "Convenient that you kept asking him to sign things then." Nolan's mouth tightened. A second patrol vehicle entered the lot, lights flashing blue through the snow. Behind it came County Animal Control. Not a full army, not a grand cavalry charge. Just two tired officers, one frightened motel clerk, a veterinarian with snow in her hair, an old volunteer who had finally stopped apologizing long enough to help, and a deputy with enough evidence to make kindness put its badge on. Nolan tried to walk toward his SUV. Grant saw it. May did too. "Mr. Greer," she said. "Stop." Nolan kept moving. Grant stepped into his path. He did not touch him. He did not need to. Nolan looked up at him, breathing hard now, snow melting along his polished hair. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Nolan said. "This town needed second hearth. I built what people wanted." Grant's voice was quiet. "You sold what they trusted." For 1 second, the storm was louder than both of them. Then May was there, taking Nolan's arm, reading him his rights with the same flat steadiness she used for traffic stops and domestic calls and every other place where human beings made ruins and called them necessary. Nolan did not confess. He did not fall to his knees. He asked for his attorney. That, May said later, was the first honest thing he had done all night. By the time the dogs were loaded safely and Arthur was wrapped in a real coat, dawn had not come, but the dark had thinned. The storm still moved across Lantern Pike, yet the motel no longer felt hidden by it. Windows glowed, radios cracked, camera flashes lit the shed in small white bursts. Arthur sat in Lena's truck beside Sable. Pip had somehow managed to wedge himself against Arthur's sleeve, the nursing bottle trapped beneath his chin. Arthur looked down at him with wonder so fragile it seemed snow could break it. "That little fool," Arthur whispered. Grant stood by the open door. "Runs in the family, apparently." Arthur laughed once, weak and real. Sable rested her head across the old man's knee. For a moment, the motel, the documents, the cages, the storm, even Nolan in the back of May's patrol vehicle, all receded. There was only an old man, a wounded dog, a puppy with a bottle, and the strange mercy of being found before the world finished forgetting you. Grant looked at Sable, then at Pip, then down at his own hands, red from cold and work. He had come to Lantern Pike thinking he was following a note. Now he understood he had been following a line of loyalty that had passed from Miriam to Arthur, from Arthur to Sable, from Sable to Pip, and from Pip to him. A ridiculous chain, maybe. A holy one. May closed the patrol door on Nolan Greer. The sound was not dramatic. It was only metal meeting metal. But in the falling snow, it felt like the first honest period at the end of a very long lie. After the storm, Hollow Creek looked almost innocent. Morning light spread over the town in a pale winter gold, touching the church steeple, the diner windows, the old feed store sign, and the snowbanks along County Road 6, as if the night before had been nothing more than weather. The pines shook loose their burden in soft white falls. Icicles along porch roofs caught the sun and burned briefly like glass candles. But some things could not be covered again. Lantern Pike Motel sat behind yellow tape now. Nolan Greer's clean SUV was gone, towed away with its polished tires and its smiling logo. The service shed had been photographed, emptied, logged, and locked. May Calder had spent half the night giving statements, making calls, and using the kind of official language that sounded dry until a person understood it was holding back a flood. Arthur Bellamy came home 2 days later. Not triumphantly. Life rarely returned people like that. He came home in Lena Whitcomb's veterinary truck because he refused an ambulance once the clinic cleared him for transport, and because, as he told anyone foolish enough to argue, "I left that farm in a stranger's car. I'll return in one full of dogs and medical smells, as God intended." He sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in a thick wool coat that Grant had found in the Bellamy mudroom. His green cap sat crooked on his white hair. His hands rested on Miriam's old nursing bottle, which he held in his lap, as if it were both relic and proof. Sable rode in the back, settled on thick blankets with her puppies tucked against her. Her injured hind leg was wrapped properly now. She was still thin, still weak, still watchful. But when the truck turned into the Bellamy Drive and the farmhouse came into view, her head lifted. Pip woke at once. He climbed over one sleeping sibling, offended another, slipped on the blanket, recovered with great dignity, and tried to look out the window, though he was too short to see anything but the side of the truck. Grant followed behind in his pickup. He drove slowly, partly because the road was still slick, partly because he did not know what kind of face a man was supposed to wear when an old farm returned from the dead. The Bellamy place looked battered in daylight. The main barn roof sagged more than Grant remembered. One porch step had cracked under the weight of ice. The small shed behind the apple trees still stood with its door open, dark inside, no longer hiding anything but shame and old straw. Snow had drifted against the fence line. A gutter hung loose over the kitchen window. The yard seemed to be holding its breath. Arthur looked at it through the windshield. No one spoke. Then he said, "Miriam would say the place needs sweeping." Lena, who was driving, glanced at him. "Only sweeping? And a roof. That's closer. And coffee." Grant parked beside the truck and got out. Arthur tried to open his own door before anyone could help him. That lasted until his hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the bottle. Grant came around without comment and opened it for him. Arthur looked annoyed. Grant said, "I'm not helping. I'm interfering with gravity." The old man considered this. Gravity's been smug lately. Grant offered an arm. Arthur stared at it for a second, pride and exhaustion fighting a small war across his face. Then he took it. They crossed the yard slowly. Each step cost Arthur something, but he paid without complaint. Near the porch, he stopped and looked toward the shed where Sable had been found. His fingers tightened on Grant's sleeve. "I thought I had more time," Arthur said. Grant did not answer too quickly. Old men said many things that sounded like weather and meant grief. "For what?" he asked. Arthur's eyes stayed on the shed. "To keep what was left safe." The words settled between them. Grant thought of his own cabin, of the closed drawer where Rourke's collar had waited in darkness, of all the ways men mistook locking something away for protecting it. "Maybe safe takes more than one man," Grant said. Arthur gave him a sideways look. "That wisdom yours, or did the puppy write it down for you?" "Pip dictates, I just translate." Arthur's laugh came out thin but real. That was how Bellamy Farm began breathing again, not with speeches, not with declarations, but with an old man laughing in a ruined yard while a half-grown winter sun melted snow from the porch rail. Inside the farmhouse, the air smelled of dust, cold wood, and the faint sweetness of apples, long gone from the cellar. Miriam's curtains still hung in the kitchen, faded yellow with tiny blue flowers. A ceramic rooster guarded the windowsill with the stern confidence of useless royalty. On one wall, a row of hooks held old leashes, feed scoops, and a red apron Arthur refused to move. Lena set up Sable and the puppies in the warmest corner of the kitchen, away from drafts. Sable watched every human in the room until Arthur lowered himself carefully into a chair beside her. The dog's body changed. Not much. but enough. Her head came down onto his slipper. Arthur covered his mouth with one hand. Pip, having no respect for sacred moments, attempted to climb onto Arthur's other foot and got stuck halfway over the edge of the blanket. Grant freed him. Pip immediately grabbed the nursing bottle and dragged it under Arthur's chair like he had been hired to secure the premises. "You see," Arthur said hoarsely, "management material." Grant looked around the kitchen, cracked linoleum, cold windows, a farm ledger on the counter, dog bowls stacked beside the sink, a house that had loved too many living things to die quietly. He had planned to help Arthur settle in. That was the phrase he had used in his own mind because it sounded temporary and clean. Help settle in, make calls, repair the lock, go home. But the farmhouse did not allow the lie to stand very long. By afternoon, May arrived in her brown sheriff's parka, with a stack of forms and a face that suggested bureaucracy had personally insulted her before breakfast. Marla Keene came behind her carrying the faded second hearth tote, now full of receipts, old volunteer rosters, and a tin of oatmeal cookies she insisted were not good but were morally available. Harold Pike showed up with a trash bag full of old towels, a hammer, and the expression of a man who wanted very much not to be thanked. Tessa Rowland appeared through a video call on Lena's tablet, hair pinned up with what looked like a pin, glasses slipping down her nose, laptop stickers visible behind her. She had already built a shared folder, color-coded records, and named one spreadsheet, Nolan's Little House of Fraud, which May said would have to be renamed before court. "No fun," Tessa said. "Law is often no fun," May replied. "That explains a lot." The farm kitchen became a headquarters, though no one called it that. Arthur sat near Sable and answered questions when he could. Lena checked the puppies every hour. Marla sorted papers and occasionally stopped with one hand pressed to her chest when she recognized a name. Harold fixed the back door without asking permission. May made phone calls on the porch because reception was better there and because some conversations sounded less patient than others. Grant repaired the lock on the small shed. He expected anger to return when he stepped inside. It did, but not alone. The shed had been cleared of the filthy straw. The wire was gone. Snowlight came through gaps in the plank wall. In one corner, an old wooden shelf still held 3 dusty feed jars, a cracked enamel bowl, and a blue tin. Grant lifted the tin. Inside were more nursing nipples, a folded cloth, and a note in Miriam Bellamy's handwriting taped under the lid. For the small ones, warm first. Feed slow. Don't rush love. Grant stood still for a long time. He did not call anyone. He simply took the tin back to the farmhouse and set it on the kitchen table beside the old bottle. Arthur saw it and closed his eyes. "That woman," he whispered, "always leaving orders." Grant looked at the note again. Warm first. Feed slow. Don't rush love. He thought of Pip pushing through snow, Sable lowering her head in the shed, Arthur taking his arm in the yard, Harold leaving a bag of towels without wanting anyone to see the tremble in his hand, Marla sorting through the wreckage of a thing she once loved. Maybe that was all healing was at first. Not a miracle. Instructions. Warm first. Feed slow. Do not rush what has been starved. The idea of Bellamy Hearth began that evening because May said the county would need temporary placement for the recovered animals. Lena said her clinic could not house them all. Marla said the old Bellamy barn had drainage if the east stalls were repaired, and Arthur said Miriam would haunt every one of you if you put those dogs in concrete kennels. No one laughed immediately. Then Harold did, a small dry bark of laughter that startled even him. Grant was the last to speak. He stood by the kitchen window, looking out toward the barn. The snow had begun to drip from the roof in slow, bright threads. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had a week ago, or perhaps only more visible. "You don't need a rescue with a logo," he said. Marla looked down at her old tote. Grant continued. You need records people can read, a vet who signs off on care, a deputy who knows where the keys are. A place for veterans' animals when winter gets ahead of them. Temporary help before somebody gets talked into surrendering the only warm thing in their house. May watched him. That is not a small project. No. Lena folded her arms. It needs permits. Yes? Insurance, Tessa said from the tablet. Probably. Volunteers who don't mind being bitten by old terriers with opinions, Marla added. Grant glanced at her. Do those exist? Rarely sane ones. Arthur lifted one finger. Coffee. It will need coffee. Harold looked around the table. And towels. For some reason, that nearly undid Grant. Not the arrests, not the motel, not even Arthur crying over the bottle. Towels. The plainness of it. The ordinary holy logistics of care. A bag of towels, a working lock, a feeding chart, a roof that did not leak, a person willing to show up before the signing of any final paper. Grant looked down. Pip had toddled over and placed the nursing bottle directly inside his left boot. Everyone saw it. No one spoke for half a second. Arthur leaned back in his chair. That's rent. Grant stared at the puppy. Pip sat down, wobbled, and looked immensely satisfied. Lena coughed into her hand. May turned away as if checking a note. Marla failed entirely and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. The sound filled the old kitchen strangely. Carefully, like sunlight entering a room that had forgotten where its windows were. Grant picked up the bottle. Temporary, he said. No one believed him. Not even Sable, who rested her chin on Arthur's slipper and closed her eyes. 2 days later, Grant drove back to his cabin alone. The road between his place and Bellamy Farm seemed shorter now, as if Pip had dragged not only a bottle through the snow, but also a hidden bridge. Grant parked beside his woodpile, went inside, and stood for a while in the quiet. The cabin looked the same. That surprised him. He had expected it to accuse him, perhaps. To resent the noise he had brought and then taken away. Instead, it waited with the same old stove, the same table, the same chair by the window. At the end of the hallway was the small drawer. Grant opened it. Rourke's collar lay wrapped in a piece of faded cloth. The leather was dark, worn smooth where a dog's neck had carried work, trust, and breath. The little metal ring missing from it had lived on Grant's wrist for years. He lifted the collar with both hands. For a moment, the hallway vanished. Heat, dust, a doorway, the wrong call. Rourke moving before Grant could command him back, the terrible bright instant after. Grant closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. The words had been in him for years, but they had always sounded useless, too small to cross the distance between the living and the dead. Now they were still small, but they were no longer locked away. He brought the collar to Bellamy Farm before sunset. No ceremony announced it, no music, no speech. Arthur was asleep in his chair. Lena was in the barn checking an old hound from Lantern Pike. May was on the phone with someone from the state attorney's office. Marla and Harold argued mildly over whether the east stalls smelled worse than the west. Grant went to the kitchen window. On the sill sat Miriam's bottle, cleaned now but still scratched, the initials MB faint in the amber light. Grant placed Rourke's collar beside it. Loss on one side, return on the other. Sable watched from her blankets. Pip, awake for once at the exact right time, waddled over, sniffed the collar, sneezed on it, and then curled up beneath the sill with the bottle between his paws. Grant looked down at him. "That's disrespectful." Pip yawned. Arthur opened one eye from the chair. "He's blessing it." He sneezed. Small priests use what they have. Grant shook his head, but he smiled. The final morning of that first week came clear and soft. Snow melted from the barn roof in steady drops. Someone had propped the farmhouse door open while Harold carried in boards, so cold air wandered through the kitchen and mingled with coffee, puppy milk, sawdust, and Lena's antiseptic. Bellamy Hearth did not yet have a sign. It did not have approval for half the things May insisted it would need. It had a notebook of names, a stack of donated towels, 3 repaired locks, a feeding station made from an old workbench, and a promise written in Tessa's spreadsheet that no animal would be transferred without records 3 people could see. It was not a sanctuary yet. It was the beginning of one. Grant sat on the porch with Pip asleep in his lap, heavy now in the way sleeping puppies became when they trusted the world to hold them. Sable lay at his feet, her wrapped leg stretched carefully to one side. Arthur sat beside him with a mug of coffee and a blanket over his knees. Across the yard, Lena checked the recovered dogs. May stood with Marla near the barn door, discussing paperwork. Harold arrived carrying another bag of towels, pretending not to notice that everyone noticed. Arthur sipped his coffee. Puppies eat more than recruits. Grant looked at Pip. This one contributes very little. Pip snored. Management, Arthur said again. The porch boards creaked under the morning. Grant looked through the open farmhouse door. On the kitchen windowsill, Miriam's bottle and Rourke's collar rested side by side in the light. He had once believed his heart after war was a burned house. A frame left standing because no one had gotten around to tearing it down. But perhaps he had misunderstood ruins. Perhaps some houses were not waiting for demolition. Perhaps they were waiting for a roof patch, a swept floor, a ridiculous puppy with a bottle, an old man with a green cap, a wounded mother dog, and enough people willing to argue about permits until mercy became practical. Pip shifted in his lap. Grant placed one hand over the small warm body and felt the steady beat beneath his palm. Some cries for help did not come loudly. They came as tiny tracks in snow, as a weak breath at a fence line, as an old object carried in a mouth too small for the task, as the unreasonable belief that someone, somewhere, might still be listening. Grant looked toward the melting fields of Hollow Creek. The door behind him stood open. For the first time in years, he did not feel the need to close it. Sometimes healing does not arrive like a thunderclap. Sometimes it comes quietly, carried by something small enough to miss, a paw print in the snow, an old bottle on a windowsill, a door left open after years of being shut. Grant thought loss had made his heart safer by closing it, but Pip reminded him that love is not a danger to survive. It is often the very thing God uses to lead us back to life. Maybe there is a small sign of hope near you too, a person who needs a call, a memory asking to be forgiven, or a door in your heart waiting to open again. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what small mercy helped you keep going. And if you want more stories like this, please subscribe and stay with us. May peace find you gently, especially in the places you thought would never feel warm again.